Just as a little frame of reference, about 10 to 15% of married couples are considered to have infertility. Patients come constantly and say they're having difficulties getting pregnant. I ask them to give me a basic definition. Define infertility. Most everybody says the inability to get pregnant. That's almost the definition. That's actually the definition of sterility, cannot get pregnant. Infertility is a couple that has been trying for 1 year and has not achieved pregnancy. It doesn't mean that they're not going to get pregnant the next month. It just means if they tried for a year and are not pregnant, then that is the definition.
I would even add live birth because recurrent miscarriages is also under that umbrella.
Absolutely, would fall in essence falls into the same thing.
Yeah, so live birth.
We also recognize that the definition of infertility applied to a 20-year-old and how we take care of them is very different than if we apply that definition to a 40-year-old couple. Okay, with that said, we talk about 30% of the time we see issues attributed to the male, 30% of the time to the female, 30% of the time to both of them, more than one issue arising. And of course, we have unexplained infertility, which if you look at the literature is 10%, 20%, 30%, or 40% of the couples, depending on what article you look at. So this is a problem that comes across our desk, comes to the office every day. There's not a day that goes by that we don't have 1, 2, or even 3 couples in this situation. Tonight, we're going to focus on 2 specific treatments that patients can receive. There are a whole bunch of different treatments, including some minor treatments, some minor hormonal treatments, some minor medication treatments. This is a very advanced treatment, and the treatment that we're going to talk about tonight is called IUI, intrauterine insemination, and IVF, in vitro fertilization. And just as a little background, the first IUI, intrauterine insemination, was recorded in 1790, and the first donor IUI was recorded in 1884. In vitro, the first baby born from in vitro fertilization was in England, Louise Brown, on July 25th of 1978. And the in vitro fertilization procedures that they did at that time have been worked on and improved to a point that we almost expect with in vitro that the couple will get pregnant. That's how high our expectation and how good the fertility doctors are today in taking care of these couples. A couple of other advances that you should know about. PGD is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis in 1990. What that did was, it was an advance for couples who have genetic disorders like Tay-Sachs. A husband and wife both carry an abnormal gene. They were able to take these embryos, study them before putting them in, and then when they found embryos that did not have that, whatever genetic disease they were looking for, they would use those embryos to help that family achieve a pregnancy and a baby. First pioneered around 1990. And then pre-implantation genetic screening, PGS, which is very common today, that they will screen the embryos for Down syndrome and a whole host of other genetic disorders before putting those embryos in. That was introduced about 2002. And basically every year that goes by, we see changes and advances in this field. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what is, I'm going to ask you, pruruvu, what is the family's obligation to fulfill? What is the definition of pruruvu?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a
tried.
loaded question.
I tried.
I mean, I have so much to say even from your introduction, your amazing introduction. I just, the only thing I'll add, because it happened, I had recently had a case where a couple was nervous to do PGD or PGS, because in order to do PGS, you have to biopsy the embryo and you have to take a cell or two off of the embryo, but there is still a risk of damaging the embryo. So now what they're doing, the technology that they're working on is called non-invasive PGD, right? So by taking not just the embryo, but the embryonic fluid and being able to test the embryonic fluid, you'll get the same results without compromising the embryo at all. So that's an example of a modern day, a 2022 advancement of technology that they're working on currently, so that will be mainstream. We'll lose that risk, thank God, of that one in however many embryos do get damaged by the PGS or the PGD. But anyway, so let's talk about Pruruvu. You wanted to add something, Doctor, or no?
I think just for everybody who's here, the idea for tonight is we're going to continue with what we usually talk about. And just to review, we've been talking to each other for many years when patients come into my office and I have shilas to ask or interesting things about halacha to ask. And that goes on. And that's what actually prompted us to start doing that, because a lot of my patients ask, could we watch what you talk about? And I said, absolutely, that's a great idea. Secondly, the intention is, and I totally entertain and encourage you to send us your questions, which I'll gather up, and at a later time, in a later Zoom, we will pick some of those questions and try to answer and talk about the halachic concepts that those questions invoke. Okay, now Pruruvu.
Back to Pruruvu. Okay, so we know that the Torah tells us that there is an obligation for that a man has to fulfill of Pruruvu, of procreation, of Pruruvu niluas haaretz v'kivshua. And the way that Chazal, the Gemara, understands that commandment is that it is a commandment on the male, that the male is obligated in the mitzvah of Pruruvu, and the female, although she's an integral ingredient, an integral part of the whole process, but it's not her actual mitzvah of Pruruvu that is limited to the man. Now, it doesn't mean that a woman doesn't have a fulfillment of a mitzvah. Many of the Rishonim assume she does have a mitzvah. The participation in Sheves, is a mitzvah. The fact that she is facilitating the act of Pruruvu and the outcome of Pruruvu is also a mitzvah. So different Rishonim in the sugi over there in Kiddushin assume that women do have a critical role and a mitzvah role in having children, but the mitzvah of Pruruvu they don't have. Now, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Pruruvu, especially when it comes to these questions of IUI and IVF, the main question is, does a husband fulfill his mitzvah of Pruruvu when the child is conceived in I don't know what word we should use, irregular or an abnormal, atypical fashion? Everyone would agree that the mainstream, normal, typical fashion of having children is having regular intercourse. The woman gets pregnant and she gives birth. That's the Seder Hadvarim. That's the way it goes. Once we're able to impregnate a woman without any physical contact between husband and wife, right? So that begs the question: does that alter, or does that prevent the husband from fulfilling his mitzvah of Pruruvu? And since this is a medical but halachic discussion, so therefore we know that there's going to be a machlokes. I'm sure there's machlokes in the world of medicine also. It's actually, if you open up the third volume of Shulchan Aruch, you open up Even HaEzer, so the Even HaEzer begins with the mitzvah of Pruruvu and the mandate of Pruruvu, and right on top, this question is asked. The Beis Shmuel, the Chalkas Machokek, the commentators on the side of the Shulchan Aruch and Even HaEzer, they ask this question: And I didn't think, you gave us the dates. You told us, in 1790 and 1884, it was the donor sperm and IUI. This conversation preceded that. So how did they have the access to such a topic? So the answer is, it's a Gemara. Everything is in the Gemara, right? So the Gemara tells us, the Gemara Chagiga tells us that the Gemara's question is a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry, must only marry a Basula. A Kohen Gadol must only marry a virgin. A Kohen cannot marry a Grusha if she was a divorcee, but if she's an Almana, if her husband died, she is permitted to a Kohen, but not to the Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol can only marry a Basula, a virgin. The Gemara has a question. What if you have a virgin who got pregnant? Is she allowed to marry a Kohen Gadol? So the Gemara says, how do you have a virgin who's pregnant? So the Gemara has a few options, but the answer that the Gemara ultimately settles with is a case where a man went into the bathtub, he took a bath, he ejaculated in the water. A woman, a virgin, subsequently entered the bath, got pregnant from the sperm that was in the water, and therefore you have a case of a woman who was impregnated without relations, so therefore she is a basula, she's a virgin, yet she's pregnant. That was the shaila of the Gemara. That was the question of the Gemara. Can such a woman marry a Kohen Gadol? So now we have the backdrop. We have this case of Nisabra Bambati, the woman who gets pregnant from the bath. So no physical contact between man and woman. The sperm enters woman, right, without any intimacy. What is the male's mitzvah? Did the male get a mitzvah of puruvu in that case? So that was the question that the Beis Shmuel, the Chelkas Machlokic, asked in the beginning of Even Ezer. Does the man who emits his sperm, who has the sperm in the bathtub, does he fulfill the mitzvah of puruvu? And bottom line, Beis Shmuel, Chelik Even Ezer, Siman Aleph, Beis Shmuel concludes that the man does in fact fulfill puruvu. The man does in fact fulfill puruvu. That is his stance. The Yavitz, though, there's the Shebos Yavitz, Yonas and Ibishitz. He writes that in a case of insemination, the father does not fulfill the mitzvah of puruvu because he writes, Shelo kederech kol haaretz. This is not the normal way. This is not the typical way of having children. And when the Torah says you have to have children, that means you have to do it in the way that we typically have children. And if you deviate from that approach, so you will not fulfill the mitzvah of puruvu, which leads you to a lumdisha discussion. Now I'll stop here because I don't want to steal the mic, but it leads us to a very analytical and Talmudic discussion. Is the mitzvah of puruvu a mitzvah that we have to engage in a certain behavior? Or is the behavior only a means to an end? The behavior, the intimacy is only allowing us to have children, but the main idea, the main goal is the children. How you do it is irrelevant, right? So that itself is a classic machlokes. Minchas Chinuch seems to say that it's only in the outcome. Rav Moshe Feinstein argues, based on a Tosfos, that it has to do very much with the actual Maisa, with the actual intimacy itself, and that could play a very, very big role in this whole picture. Fast forward to the bottom line, poskim. Rabbi, I once had Rabbi Herschel Schechter, I once had a conversation with him about this, and he was questioning the fulfillment of the father in such a case of IUI and IVF. He was taking the side of perhaps of the Yavitz, that maybe you really do need a formal act of intimacy and intercourse in order for there to be a fulfillment of the mitzvah puruvu. However, modern day poskim such as Rabbi Yoshev, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, I believe. Oh no, I take that back. He actually had Rabbi Shlomo Zalman on his side. Rabbi Yoshev, Rav Vosner, Rav Sternbach, Rabbi Willig, and others, and Rav Moshe Feinstein are of the opinion that if a child is born through IUI or IVF, the father is Makayim Pru'urvu. He fulfills his mitzvah of Pru'urvu, and you shouldn't say anything negative about those children because it would be inappropriate to be what we call motzilas and to say inappropriate things about them, that they're illegitimate or not authentic Jews or not authentic something because they were not conceived in the quote unquote normal way.
So it's the act, it's having children is one way to be Makayim, or the mitzvah, and two is just the act. Let's say somebody, they're married and they go through their whole marriage and they never have children, but they've tried their whole marriage to have children. Are they Makayim the mitzvah?
That's a good question. It's hard to say that they're Makayim the mitzvah, because even if you hold that you need to do the act, it's the act which brings children. Now you should know the Gemara at Shabbos and Daf Lamed Gimel says that when we come to the day of judgment, the ultimate day of judgment, after 120, we approach and beseech the Kisei HaKavod. So we approach Hashem and his Beis Din, and Hashem is going, or the dying, whoever's up there, whichever the Malachim or Hashem himself, the heavenly court will ask us a few questions. They're going to ask us, did we learn Torah? They're going to ask us, were we honest in business? And then they're going to ask us, asakta b'peri v'rivya. One of the 6 questions that were asked is, asakta b'peri v'rivya. Were you osek? Were you involved in pruruvu? So it doesn't say, were you makayim pruruvu, right? That's beyond us. And you know better than anyone. Couples can try blood, sweat, and tears. They try everything. And sometimes they just can't they're doing everything in their power, but sometimes they don't get pregnant. That's not their fault. And they should never feel ashamed or guilty or anything that they're not doing something. It's beyond us. So Hashem didn't ask us if we were Makayim Puruvu. He asked us, were you Osek in Puruvu? Were you engaged in Puruvu? But even so, I was always bothered by the question, what do you mean was I engaged in Puruvu? Let's say I have children, right? Baruch Hashem, I have children. So what's Hashem going to be asking me? Do you have children? You know very well that I have children. You were Gimel Shutfin Badam. You were a part and parcel of all of them. So what are you asking me? What's the question? If he's asking me, do you learn Torah? So if I say yes, he could say, oh, you learn Torah? What about on April 25th at 6 o'clock? You could have learned then. How come you didn't learn then? Right? So then he's got a point. That's how Hashem is going to ask us that. So we're going to be held accountable. But to have children, it's a yes or no answer, and Hashem should absolutely know the answer already. So the Maharsha, I think, was sensitive to this question. And Maharsha writes there that Hashem is not asking us, do we have children or not? Asakta b'peri v'rivya, were you osek that there should be children, i.e., were you osek in shidduchim? That's what he asks. That's what he says. Hashem is going to ask us at the end of 120, were you engaged in shidduchim to see to it that marriages can be made and children can be born? And if we say yes, so then he can ask, what about that idea that you had of that guy and that girl? How come we didn't put them together? So then we'll be held responsible and accountable for the shidduchim that we could have made and didn't. But you can't say that if a person doesn't have children, they were makayim, even if they tried. But again, they're not held responsible because it's beyond their control. Onus rachmana patrin. There is a Gadic Gemara that says if you teach Torah to children, it's like they become your children. If you raise children in your home, it's like children. So some posts can point to those Agadic sources that if you adopt, then perhaps it's like you raised them, it's like you gave birth to them and they're your children because you raised them in your house. So it's maybe there's a partial kiyum of pruruvu, but on a strict halachic level, it's hard to justify that. From a halachic perspective, it's more of an Agadic, an important approach, but an Agadic one.
I think also today we could add people who help other people with fertility issues and get them to the point where they have children also. I think that's reasonable to include in this.
In a sakta b'peri v'rivya.
Yes.
Yeah. Listen, you always hear the Yisachar Zvulun deals. Person gives money, he supports someone in learning. As everyone knows, the fertility journey is expensive. It's beyond expensive. So people who donate and who are able to fund the cycles for people who can't afford, sakta b'peri v'rivya. I love it. It's a good fundraising pitch. Thank you, Dr. Herman.
You're welcome. With that said, I'm going to talk about some of the patients that come through my office. Obviously, not about specific patients, but it's about some part of their story. During the course of my career, I've had couples come in and they have difficulty getting pregnant, and I do and work out a basic fertility workup. And after doing an analysis, we find out or discover that the husband has something, a genetic abnormality that he was born with, that markedly reduces his sperm count or even gets it to 0. Instead of having XY chromosomes, he has XXY chromosomes, an extra chromosome. This is called Klinefelter syndrome. And during my time in my office, I've had a number of from patients who had no idea growing up that they've had this, only to find out when they tried to get pregnant. Fortunately, for some, they have some sperm. And as we mentioned or didn't mention, they could take, even if there's one sperm available, and directly put it into the egg, helping create an embryo, and that couple could get pregnant. Secondly, today, they would do a testicular biopsy if they didn't see any sperm at all, and they could find immature sperm and work with that to again, achieve an embryo and help the couple get pregnant.
I think that might be still in its research stage. I'm not sure if that's mainstream.
It's not mainstream, but they're getting there. And I know in Manhattan that there's a doctor who works on it. And
yeah, they're getting on it. They're
also
working on it.
Yes.
Right now, we just have sperm extraction, or the biopsy of the testicle to take out live sperm, and then do the ICSI.
In my office, I've had at least 2, if not 3, husbands who have no sperm at all, which presents a very big problem for this couple. They're married. The only thing, they could only resort to 2 things. One is donor sperm, and 2 is adoption. So the first thing I would like to talk about is donor sperm. Within Halacha, is there a place for donor sperm in these couples, for these couples?
You don't wait till we get comfortable with each other. You don't wait. You just go right in. You go right in for the kill.
Right in. So
donor sperm is an unbelievably controversial topic. And I was recently on a different webinar about third-party reproduction, and I made the same point. Well, let me give some background to it. Piggybacking off of how you started tonight's session. So you started with the mitzvah of puruvu, and as we analyze different treatments, IUI, as you mentioned, IVF, egg donation, surrogacy, sperm donation, all of, as you climb the ladder of fertility treatment, each step along the way, we have to ask ourselves, what is the justification for such a treatment? Because maybe we should give some background to fertility in general from a halachic standpoint. When Louise Brown was born in 1978, and the Shilas started coming into the Poskei Hador, that's Tzitz Eliezer and Reb Shlomo Zalman, the great poskim of the generation, the answer that they were giving, responding to these couples who were asking if they could engage in fertility treatment, was no. Many of the poskim were against, and they were opposed to fertility treatments for a myriad of reasons, but mainly because this was new technology, which infringed or encroached on the yichus of Klal Yisrael. Nobody knew, you have genetic material flying, you have eggs and sperm, and who knows what's going on, and what happens if it gets mixed up with this one and that one, and the whole question about sperm being, injected or inseminated without intercourse. So all of these questions were so overwhelming that the poskim really kind of shut the door, and it was a no. That's how Pua began. Pua began with Rav Mordechai Eliyahu sitting down, the head of Pua, Rabbi Borstein, Menachem Borstein, saying, let's identify all of the points of opposition, and let's try to, one by one, to figure out a way that we could navigate and circumvent this halachic issue so we could do it properly, halachically, and allow these couples to celebrate technology as opposed to shutting them away. So each part of the justification, the driving justification for each point or each treatment is, how could we say no? There's a mitzvah of pruruvu. There's pruruvu. You have to have pruruvu. There's a mitzvah over here, right? When you come, so with that introduction, now let's revisit sperm donation. Sperm donation, you have an azoospermic patient, Klinefelters or whatever it is. The sperm that they're using, very nice. The woman will get pregnant, a baby will be born, a family will be grown. There's no greater simcha than having a family. But the child will definitely not be the father's child. It's foreign sperm, it's donor sperm. So can we say that this treatment of donor sperm will help satisfy and fulfill the mitzvah of pruruvu on the father's behalf? I don't hear how you could say such a thing, because it's not his sperm. So right off the bat, we're entering a treatment where we know there will not be a kiyum, a fulfillment of pruruvu. Whereas when we analyze donor eggs or surrogacy, if whoever the mother is, that's a different topic, a different conversation, but let's assume it's the genetics will determine motherhood. So as long as you have a Jewish egg and I'll take the opposite approach. Let's say it's the birth mother.
We'll get to that in a few minutes.
So if it's the birth mother, so you could take a non-Jewish egg, the birth mother is the mother, she's the mother, the baby's Jewish. So if the father, it's his sperm, Jewish woman gave birth, Jewish baby. So now we can justify that process, that treatment, because we know that the husband fulfilled pruruvu. Right. So that's a very different, from the get-go, we have a very different attitude towards donor sperm. So the shaila is, in a case where the husband will not fulfill the mitzvah of pruruvu, are we allowed to take a donor sperm for patients who are azoospermic and allow the families to have a child? So Rav Moshe has not one, not two. I don't think it's three. I think it's four, at least four tshuvas that are published in Igros Moshe. And Rav Moshe writes that he doesn't see the issue. What could possibly be the issue? He says, you'll tell me that you might have siblings marrying each other, because if you have a donor who donates to this couple and a donor who donates to that couple, and the children, right, are sharing the same sperm, right? They have the same father. So the two of them could marry. This male and this female could marry. You'll have siblings. So Rav Moshe writes, by taking non-Jewish sperm, you alleviate that issue, right? Because non-Jewish sperm, when we're dealing with non-Jews, the yichus is broken, the lineage is broken, and you have no issue. He says, maybe you'll say that inserting or inseminating sperm into a married woman, a foreign sperm, it could be a problem of incest, znos, could create mamzerim, right? For instance, if this married woman, were to sleep with another man, the product of that affair would be a mamzer. So maybe if she has someone else's sperm inseminated into her body as a married woman, she's married to him and she's getting sperm from him, so someone else, so maybe that could create a mamzer. Rav Moshe writes clearly, mamzeros is only generated through intercourse. So much so that if you have a mamzer who marries a mamzeres, or mamzer can't marry too many people, but a mamzeres he can. So a mamzer marries mamzeres, so their children will always be mamzerim. However, if they get pregnant through in vitro or through insemination, and they don't have intercourse, the child isn't conceived through intercourse between a mamzer and a mamzeres, says Rav Moshe, the child will not be a mamzer. Because mamzerus is generated through the act of bia with a mamzer. And here is no bia, there's no intercourse. It's an amazing way to eradicate mamzerus from the world. Assuming people stop sleeping with each other's wives, so then we could get rid of mamzerus. But anyway, so says Rav Moshe, what would be the issue with sperm donation? Take a non-Jewish sperm. You won't have the problem of siblings. You won't have the problem with mamzerus either way, because he doesn't hold mamzerus with insemination, or just take a non-Jewish sperm and there's no mamzerus by anybody. So Moshe says, what's the problem? However, people who are familiar with history, if this Shaila, there was a tremendous war that broke out around this question. The Satmarov was vehemently opposed to Rav Moshe's approach. Hasidim came and they didn't just argue with Rav Moshe. They violently argued with him. They threw rocks in his window. They burned his books. They tried to beat people up. It was horrible. If you look in the introduction to Igros Moshe, Chelik Ches, which was published posthumously after Rav Moshe passed away, the children put out the 8th volume of Igros Moshe, and they included in the Hakdama, in the introduction, they included a biography of Rav Moshe. And when they wrote about this specific topic, it was this, insemination, and Rav Moshe's psak on the height of a mechitza in shul, that it only needed to be Yud Ches Tfachim, about 40 inches or so. So, when Rav Moshe came out with these controversial rulings, some of the Hasidic world went crazy. And it said that in the introduction there, they write that it gave Rav Moshe tremendous agmas nefesh. He was very hurt by it, but he would not back down. He would not back down. And in one tshuva, he seems to insinuate, he writes that maybe we shouldn't give this heter, so freely, but it's definitely mutter. And then he stopped. There are also other tshuvas, by the way, if you wanted to look more into this. So there's 4 tshuvas that are published in Igros Moshe, and then Rav Moshe published other tshuvas in response to everyone who wrote him, a nasty letter saying that he's wrong. He addressed each and every one of them. He did include them in Igros Moshe, but he included them in Dibros Moshe in Chelik and the volume on Ksubis. So if you look, Rav Moshe has 2 sets of Sfarim, Igros Moshe and Dibros Moshe. Igros is the responsive, and Dibros Moshe is his parish on Shas. So on his Shas commentary in Ksubis, right in the middle, there's a whole pamphlet of tshuvas that he wrote in response to anyone who asked him anything about sperm donation, and in each and every one of those tshuvas, he writes that it's permissible. That being said, it is very hard, and I'll tell you from a personal level, I've spoken to many Rabbanim about this. It is very hard to find a Rav who will be comfortable paskening, let alone paskening publicly, but paskening and ruling in favor of sperm donation. It's very difficult to find. And I'm not sure I really don't have a good answer for that. But I can tell you why that is. Because in every other area of halacha, we turn to Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe was Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe was Rav Moshe. It doesn't get greater than Rav Moshe Feinstein. Nevertheless, with this topic, many Rabbanim who always go to Rav Moshe as the posek are hesitant to rely on Rav Moshe for this specific heter. That being said, from the other angle, I'll tell you that I'm personally involved with many cases of azoospermic patients. I know many of them, and they have obtained heterim from reliable and world-renowned Orthodox Haredi poskim. And it's important to know is every situation is different. Every couple's shaila is different. And I would encourage couples who unfortunately are faced with that, this diagnosis of azoospermia, complete and absolute azoospermia, to be in touch with their competent Rav who knows about these heterim and who can help the couple.
A couple of thoughts, quick thoughts surrounding this. I understand that there's a difference between getting sperm in the United States and getting it in Israel, because in the United States, from what I understand, you could sort of rely that most of that sperm, way far more than Rove, are not Jewish sperm. And in Israel, it's much more likely to get a Jewish sperm sample.
Right.
Yes. So the way that there's a slightly different approach in Israel than there is in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rav Moshe, though, the Rav Moshe's psak Ramosha would allow for a Jewish sperm as well, meaning there are poskim who would allow for a Jewish sperm. It's just that when contemporary poskim, when we actually pull the trigger and allow for it, usually it's done with a non-Jewish, to try to get a non-Jewish donor. Rabbi Willig once told me that he feels like the most ideal candidate for a sperm donor, to be a sperm donor, not to be the recipient, but to be the actual donor, is someone whose mother is not Jewish, but whose father is Jewish. So therefore, halachically, they're not Jewish because the mother is not Jewish, but Zera is Zera Yisrael. The Zera is coming from their father, so they're still included in Zera Yisrael, but not Jewish because their mother is not Jewish. Unfortunately, it's that's not one of the tabs on the California Cryobank. When you have to filter your search, that's not one of the search buttons. Zera Yisrael. But maybe one day, maybe it is.
So, if let's say that sperm donor, that Jewish sperm donor whose father is Jewish and the mother is not Jewish, I don't know, comes from a lineage of Kohanim. And that's the genes.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Kohen line going right through this guy, and now this child has the genes of a Kohen. I would think that child is not a Kohen. The father was not even Jewish. The sperm father was not Jewish. You understand my question?
Let's see this. If the sperm father was not Jew, where is the Kohen genes coming from?
The sperm donor, father was Jewish and a Kohen, and the mother was not Jewish. And now he donated the sperm, and a boy was born out of that donation.
Yeah. In general, there's a whole discussion we could talk about the Kohen gene. Papers were written about trying to prove that Kohanim have a certain, genetic sequence, and you're able to prove kahuna through the gene sequence, but it's been disproven because of the fact, not that it's disproven genetically, but halachically it's been disproven because the moment that one of the Kohanim don't observe the halachas of kahuna, they marry a grusha, there's a case of a zona, so that would disqualify the Kohen from being a Kohen, it would create a din of a cholol. The children are therefore not Kohanim. So genetically, you could have the Kohen gene, but that could have been disqualified from a non-halachic past. So the history can create a non-halachic Kohen gene. You know what I'm saying? But we would not. In that case, we would not assume that the child is a Kohen.
So this child is born right from a donor sperm. And this couple, it happens to be that the husband is a Kohen. The Kleinfelter Kohen. And now it comes to this kid's bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
And it's called up for an aliyah in front of the whole community.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
It's a very big issue. It's a very big issue. It's how could we justify calling him a Kohen? The aliyah is one thing. The aliyah is one thing.
Okay, duchening.
Duchening. He makes a bracha. So there you make when you have an aliyah. So what name they're going to call you up to the Torah? All right, and you make the fact that you got the first aliyah as opposed to the third aliyah. All right, but when he has to be ola leduchen for birchas kohanim and recite the bracha that only Kohanim can recite, that should be a bracha levatala.
Yeah.
So this question is such a serious question that I know multiple couples who have a heter to do sperm donation, and they will, with that heter, go on to use PGD and only have girls, so that they avoid the shaila altogether.
Wow.
They only need an IUI when you have sperm donation. If it's a young woman with no fertility issues, you don't need to go on to the intense and expensive treatments of IVF. You could just do a simple insemination and she can get pregnant like that. But you won't be able to choose the gender if you do that. And should they have a boy, you'll have serious issues if he's a Kohen. So you should know for Kohanim who do this, our eitzah to them is a Kohen who needs sperm donation should do IVF with PGD and do gender selection to only have girls, so that they don't run into that issue.
Okay, a slightly different scenario. A couple has 2 children. The husband gets testicular cancer and has treatment, and now he has no more sperm. Okay, and they have another child through sperm donation. At the end of 120, the 2 children turn around to this third child and goes, wait a minute, you're not deserving of any inheritance over here. You're not his child. You're not our sibling. How does halacha look at that type of case?
Yeah, they're not children. They're not the children of the guy for the basic Yerusha. I think what practically people do is that if you have the halachic will, so you're able to portion out, ration out your Yerusha in a way that even the non-biological child will inherit. But you're absolutely right. Meaning inheritance is another area of halacha where the claim is this: you're not a brother. You're not a brother. It's a serious issue.
Let's say they turn to adoption.
Can I share with you an amazing story?
Absolutely.
This is an amazing story. True story. And it fits into people who are learning Daf Yomi now, learning Yevamis. A woman's husband died, and she has a few children. Her husband died, and in order to help out around the house, her brother-in-law came to the house and was helping her out with the children. Meaning the brother of her late husband. They got closer and closer, and eventually she got pregnant with him. Now, you're not allowed to get pregnant with your even late husband's brother. It's an erva. It would create a mamzer, and the Beis Din said that this woman is pregnant with a mamzer, and she responded to the Beis Din, "I'm not pregnant with a mamzer. The laws of Yibum says that I'm allowed to be with him." To which the Beis Din responded, "The laws of Yibum only apply when you don't have any children, but you have children." So her response was, "It's true that I have children, but my late husband was azospermic, and all of the children were born from a sperm donation. So really, all of the children are not genetic or not biologically related to my first husband, and therefore I should be able to at least midiraisa sleep with my brother-in-law because of Yibum, and therefore, even though we don't do it, right? In that case, I would need, it wasn't done properly, but I would need, it's not a mamzer, and therefore the child doesn't have to, whatever, can continue living a normal life." The shaila of the Beis Din, can we rely on her testimony that her husband did in fact that she used the sperm donation? Her late husband was in fact azospermic. And what is the evidence necessary in order for the Beis Din to paskin that shaila? Is bringing semen analysis from 20 years prior, 30 years prior, sufficient edus to say that he was really azospermic? Let's say she was able to present that he was Klinefelter's. I can have a genetic report. He was XXY. Is that enough for the Beis Din to say, you're right, he was XXY, it must be there were no children from biological children, and therefore the child's not a mamzer because of Yibum? Amazing, no?
Today, incredible. Today, they could do 23andMe on these kids and see who they were related to.
That's another question. Someone asked me that this morning.
Yeah.
Do the paternity tests carry halachic weight in Beis Din? I'll give you another question. I'll give you another case. A Kohen, and I'm sorry if we're deviating, it's just I can't hold myself back. A Kohen did a DNA test, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, whatever. He shouldn't have done it, but he did it. He finds out that his father is not his father. Now, his father is a Kohen. He thought his father was a kohen. That's why he thought he is a kohen. So that was question number one. Is he allowed to continue calling him a kohen? Himself a kohen? But then it gets better or worse. He does more research and he's able to trace his biological father, who happens to be the next door neighbor. And his mother had an affair while she was married with the next door neighbor, and he is a product of that. He would be a mamzer. Do we take DNA? Does halacha recognize DNA to the point where we would drop his kahuna and call him a mamzer? Or does DNA, it's an interesting finding, it's maybe scientifically important, but halachically wouldn't go so far as to make those major decisions based on just DNA. Separate shear, DNA and halacha. Yeah.
The Kleinfelter marriage that decides on adoption. They adopt a Jewish baby or a non-Jewish baby, or it doesn't matter. Is there a preference?
That's a good question. I'll preface this. I am not an expert in adoption. I'll right off the bat, I'm not an expert in adoption. The organization does not specialize in adoption. I've been asked why not. And the answer is we want women to get pregnant. We don't want you to adopt. We want women to get pregnant. And sometimes that means going beyond the normal realm of fertility treatment. But if that's what a couple needs, so under the halachic, within the halachic spectrum, hopefully we're able to see to it that it can be achieved according to halacha. But I do know that number one, Jewish adoption, which I do believe is ideal, is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to actually find the Jewish baby. I think that the reason for that is because of the greatness of the Jewish people, that we will not allow a Jewish child, an underprivileged Jewish child, to go to an orphanage and to be put up for an adoption by whichever Tom, Dick, and Harry walks into the orphanage that day and wants a baby. Klal Yisrael cares about each other too much to let that happen. And we have foster programs. We have all different programs in the Jewish community to make sure that these children are cared for. So therefore, going through the mainstream avenues of adoption, beyond the expense, which is very expensive, but it's also impractical to try to find the Jewish baby. I know I have a couple, amazing couple. She was born with Rakitansky syndrome. She's got no uterus. She also doesn't have any eggs. She doesn't have ovaries. He went through some issue. I don't think he has testicles. So they're married. And they always thought they were going to adopt. They got married knowing his medical situation, her medical situation. They always thought they were going to adopt. After 5 or 6 or 7 years of trying to find trying to adopt a child, they were unsuccessful. So they started to look into other options. They give me a call. What maybe for help? So I said, let's think outside the box. She says, I don't have a uterus. I said, let's consider uterine transplant. So fast forward a few months.
You're so ahead of me. That was my last question of the night.
Okay, so we can talk about it later, but I'm just telling you that she is mamish next online in Baylor, Texas, in the Baylor Hospital for uterine transplantation. They've created embryos already, and hopefully, B'ezras Hashem, she will get pregnant one day soon with her donated uterus.
Let's circle back to the story after 2 cases that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
We're going to end off with that story. Okay.
So, okay, good. So adoption, I think it is better to take a Jewish baby.
And there's no problem if this couple has, who knows if there are other siblings of this Jewish baby out there in the world that one day they might cross paths.
It's a good question. It is a good question. There is an overwhelming majority out there in the world that that the person who they marry will not be a sibling. That's enough. That majority, that rove that exists, is enough to let them marry. That's the way we generally paskin. Although when you learn the sugyas in Kiddushin, the 4th parak of Kiddushin, There are shtuki and asufi and the people who, don't know their fathers and this and that. And on a practical level, when you're adopting and you don't have the proper paperwork of, at least who the parents are and their Jewish status, so sometimes we would do a conversion, for l'chumrah. But I think it is better to take a Jewish baby than a non-Jewish baby.
So a non-Jewish adopted baby, when they get to bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, could decide just to walk away.
Yeah, there are different approaches to that as well. There's a possibility of doing a gerus as a child and not telling them. But Moshe says that's ill-advised. If they find out later when they're 20 or 30, then they could just walk away, and it would be effective. So it's ill-advised, but it's this scary thing. Not gonna lie.
Okay. Next question, and it does happen. Single, unmarried, Jewish from woman says, my prospects on marriage have passed me by, and I have my eggs, and I would like to get them fertilized, and I would like to have a child. Prospects for me are awful. How do we handle that?
That's a touchy subject. I think one of the reasons why it's so touchy is similar to the sperm donation question, where it was kind of like, why is this not accepted? Rav Moshe wrote countless tshuvas, and he has countless, letters and articles that he wrote permitting it. Why are we forbidding this? It's hard to pinpoint and identify and articulate an isser. What's the prohibition? What would be the problem halachically of taking a non-Jewish sperm, or Jewish sperm for that matter, she's single. And for the Jewish sperm, you'll have the potential shaila of achoso, the siblings marrying. But non-Jewish, the issue is that I have never met, and if they exist, then I haven't met them, so I'm not devaluing them or discrediting them, but I've never found a reputable Orthodox posek that has come out publicly or even privately and said that this is permissible. And because the halachic community, the community of poskim, of halachic authorities and decisors, haven't accepted it and have never permitted it, never, I'm sure there are cases. It's hard for other rabbanim to go ahead and give up psak. There's no precedent. I once asked this question to one of the leading poskim of our time, Haredi posek. I once asked him this question, and he's very involved in medical halacha, and he's a posek, a world-renowned posek, lives in Eretz Yisrael. I asked him this question, and he told me not too long ago, a woman came to his office, and this was her exact predicament. She's getting older, she's not getting married, she's giving up. He says she is the most capable woman out there. Sometimes we say, don't do it because single motherhood is not ideal. Rahman al-Islam, unfortunately today, I went to a levaya of a young woman, has 2 children. She was 40 years old here in LA. Unfortunately, her husband is now left alone with 2 children. We never want a single parent to be in that situation where they're by themselves, but sometimes it happens. But to begin the situation where I know from the get-go I'm going to have a situation of single parenthood, what are you doing to the child? You're putting the child at a disadvantage. Okay, so some poskim say you shouldn't do it because you're putting the child at a disadvantage, and therefore v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. The child, I think everyone would agree, I'm not a psychologist or a social worker or a therapist, but I think we would agree that children develop and flourish in a house with 2 parents, and the healthy model of a family is 2 parents, a mother and a father. So you're starting out at a disadvantage with this child. Rav David Cohen has told me he thinks it's an Isser Deraisa. Rav David Cohen is he's very loud about this. He will not hold back. He holds an Isser Deraisa of Ahavta l'recha kamocha. He says we're not Megadol Yisoimim. We don't give birth to Yisoimim. And that's what this child is. He says, Yosem, without one, lost a parent. It's hard to, that's Rav David's opinion. But I asked this other posik, what do we do? He said, listen, I had this woman, she was capable, she's going to be an amazing mother. He said, but he told her, what am I supposed to do? My hands are tied. The Halachic community has not come out and accepted this. So what am I supposed to do? He said, I just sat with her and I cried with her. I cried with her. Because on the one hand, it doesn't mean that we're not ignoring you. We don't think that these women are a lesser second-class citizens. Chas v'sholom. They have their situation. We're trying to do everything that we can in our halachic power to help them. But at a certain point, it only goes so far. It only goes so far. And I can just tell you, from a rabbi's perspective, a community rabbi's perspective, the children who are born from these types of, from the sperm donation to single mothers, when it comes to the children in class, from the children's perspective, from a social perspective, and also from an administrative perspective, the child is at such a disadvantage. I may be generalizing this, but I'm saying from my experience, when the schools that I was involved in and the rabbinic boards that I sat on, and the questions come up, do we accept this child? This is the other kids are going to ask. It's the child has to jump through hoops, and he didn't do anything wrong, and he's a Jewish child. He has to jump through hoops just to stay afloat, and socially, and also amongst the rabbeim and in community, it's just so difficult. So, to answer your question, I can't answer. I don't have a real halachic psak, but that being said, I don't have the tools to permit it, given that explanation.
It's 8:57. Could we spend another half an hour? You good with it?
Yeah. It's only 5:57 for me.
Here. My first year in practice in 1993. I was in my office Monday night seeing patients. I remember it clearly. This woman came in and brought her daughter to my office, a 16-year-old. This is not a Jewish family, but this is the real story. And she says, my daughter hasn't had a period yet, I'm worried. And I'm newly out of residency. I laugh, I joke, I'm at the top of my game. I know everything at that point. I just graduated. 10 minutes later, I diagnosed her with Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome. 1 in 4,000 to 5,000 women, so 1 in 10,000 babies that are born. That was 1993. Now we're in where we're up to. 4 months ago, I had found my second one, this time in a Jewish family. They actually are friendly with each other and talk to each other, put them together.
The non-Jewish and the Jewish couple?
Yes.
Wow.
They're helping each other now.
Wow.
Yes. Just to tell you the rest of the story, I reassured, first the mother said, I'll carry the baby. This is a girl who was born without a womb. Okay. She outside looks normal if you look at her anatomy, and she has ovaries, so she has eggs. She has no place to carry them. Her mother's first response is, I'll carry your babies for you, and there have been cases like that. And then as she went through school, it was actually interesting that she had told her friends about what was going on, and her friends said they'll carry the baby for her when she gets older. And as time went by, I reassured her year after year that when the time comes, I'll be able to help her. And at 33 years old, she says, now I am ready to have children. And I introduced her to a fertility doctor, and they found what's called a gestational carrier in Atlanta, Georgia, because the laws are more accepting there. And they took her egg and her husband's sperm, they fertilized it, put it in this woman. And at 8 weeks, they did an ultrasound and it split into 2. And I just saw her 2 weeks ago when we talked about her 10-year-old boys.
Wow. That's amazing.
She wrote me an email and still said today, I lacked confidence, but I remembered every year you told me that we're going to get this done.
Amazing.
Okay. Now we turn to a second story. a baby is born. Mazel tov, it's a girl. And as time goes by, no periods, we do a workup and figure out that this female, who's totally female, actually has male chromosomes, XY, something called testicular feminization, where her body does not recognize testosterone. Testosterone is activity. So a male needs that testosterone in order to form into a male. And she grows up. Eventually, her testes, which are inside her body, are removed because they could turn cancerous. And she has a womb. She could carry a baby. So she goes ahead and gets married, right? And they want to have a baby. And if someone donates an egg to her with her husband's sperm, they could implant it into her, and she has kids. And I have patients like that. So it comes to that whole host of questions, right? The first case, Mary-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, there's a husband's sperm, mother's eggs, and a gestational carrier, another woman carrying the baby. Testicular feminization is where the husband's sperm and a donor egg, but the wife is carrying the baby. So the first question is, who's the mother of the baby when the baby comes out? And we know already there's three choices in a big argument in Halacha or discussion in Halacha. Some say it's the woman who gave birth to the baby. I've been asking my patients for the last 3 weeks, knowing that we're going to have this conversation, and they go, it's the genetics. It's the genetic mother, the mother who made the egg, not the woman who gave birth to it. And we also know that poskim have said, I can't figure it out, so they're both considered the mother. So I'm going to ask you to comment on that with a few follow-up questions to why is it important to know who the mother is?
You did a perfect job. You did an excellent job with the basic synopsis. I don't have much to add. Although I recall a story. I was once driving Rav Hershel Schechter in the car, and I asked him this question, and he said that he recently had mentioned and met an old Yid in Muncie. That's what he said. I met an old Yid in Muncie, and this old Yid in Muncie asked this question to Rav Moshe. Ask Rav Moshe, who would be the mother if you have a different egg or a different womb? Who would be the mother? So Rav Moshe said the birth mother is the mother. Whoever gives birth to the baby, that's the woman who's the mother. So he asked for a proof. How do you know? So he said Rav Moshe thought about it for a little bit and said, you want to tell me that a woman who carries a baby for 9 months is not going to be the mother? How could that be? He couldn't even fathom another option. But as you pointed out correctly, there are Rabbanim who disagree with that approach 100%. And they say that the womb is irrelevant. The womb is simply an incubator and allowing for the embryo to develop. But the meat and potatoes is in the genes. It's the egg, it's the sperm. So if the egg is Jewish, so okay, very nice. You have a beautiful incubator, Jewish or non-Jewish, but that incubator is only allowing the potential to reach to become reality. And therefore, it's all about the genes. There are, not only are there 3 shittas, there are outliers on each side, right, who actually hold that way and practice it halacha today. You know, there are poskim who are alive today who say that if it's the birth mother 100%. There are poskim alive today who say it's the egg mother 100%. But I can tell you from my experience that the middle road, which is the most accepted, is the both mother approach, or the I'm not sure approach, or how could we possibly know approach. And therefore, since we could never possibly figure out conclusively who is the mother, we are obligated to err on the side of caution. And therefore, if there's a non-Jewish ingredient, whether it's a non-Jewish gestational carrier or a non-Jewish egg donor, whatever it is, a gerus, a conversion must be performed.
So
and that
a from man and his from wife's eggs are fertilized and planted into a non-Jewish woman.
Christina carries the baby.
Yeah, gerus.
Gerus. We would do a gerus. And then the question there would be, what's the nature of the gerus? Is it a real gerus? Is it a gerus l'chumra? I'll give you a case that I had. One of the first shilas that came my way once I started working at Pua. A woman calls. 20 years prior, she had received a non-Jewish egg. She had a premature ovarian failure, a diminished ovarian reserve, whatever the proper medical term for it is now, it's politically correct. It was premature ovarian failure, now it's diminished ovarian reserve. So she took a non-Jewish egg. The doctor at the time assured her, she's the mother, you have nothing to worry about. Fine, she is the mother. She assumed the baby was Jewish. She was listening to a shiur online on this topic. And what was the bottom line from the shiur? The shiur was, maybe it's the egg, and maybe it's not so clear. And therefore, you have to err on the side of caution and do a conversion, or whatever it was. But she called in a panic, saying, I was told that I was the mother. Now I'm being told that I'm potentially not the mother. And my daughter, who's 20, 21, 22 years old, she was in Stern College at the time. She was just about to begin shidduchim. And she said, now I had this headache about my daughter dating. Now I don't have my headache about my daughter dating. I have a headache. Is my daughter Jewish? So that question kind of really was the question that opened my eyes to this whole parsha, this whole subject of third-party reproduction. And I actually spoke to one of the Gedolei Yisrael who since passed away, and he told me that in this case she can do it. She could do a conversion, but she won't be usher to a Kohen. Normally, a woman who has a conversion, she's a Giores, is not allowed to marry a Kohen. He said, in this case, you have a right to rely on the poskim that the birth mother is the mother, but you should still do a gerus. But that gerus is only, a cherry on top. It's only to, dot your I's and cross your T's, but it's not going to be halachically binding to the point where you won't be able to marry a Kohen. Not everyone agrees to that. Not everyone agrees to that. But that's the mainstream approach. The mainstream approach is that a conversion is done, and we don't have time to go into the difficulty and the complicated questions that come up with gerus, because Bezdin will only do gerus on a frum family. If a child is not going to be shomer Torah mitzvos, they're not going to keep kosher, they're not going to keep Shabbos, so the Bezdin won't do the conversion. Because why should I convert this child to Judaism for him to not be kosher and not keep Shabbos? So what do you do with an irreligious couple that asks this question? Very nice, we say that you should have a conversion, but if practically speaking, the Bezdin won't do it, so there are some major issues out there. It's very, very common. This question is very serious in Eretz Yisrael. And I can tell you that Batei Din in Israel meet regularly to discuss this question. And because it is so common for the Chiloni community to take non-Jewish eggs, it's a serious, serious issue.
At the end of 120 years, does this child have to sit shiva for both of those women?
Yeah. If we say gerus l'chumra, what gerus l'chumra would mean is that I have to err on the side of caution. I have to always assume whatever's going to be more machmir. So here we would say that you have to be machmir and assume that she is in fact your mother, and you would have to sit shiva.
You just got a notification one day in the mail, like your egg donor mother passed away. It's interesting. Next question along those same lines.
I hope just so that people should know, modern day egg donation is done almost always anonymously. So you will never know.
Yeah, but with 23andMe today, you could figure it out.
That's true. That's true.
Well, most people thought you couldn't figure it out, but you could figure it out now.
And that leads us to another discussion, which we'll do at a different time, and that's disclosing the information to the child. Do you tell? Do you not tell?
Okay, so this from gentleman sperm, his from wife's egg, no uterus, so gestational carrier, and it's their first child. The baby is born vaginally, pidyon ben. Does this child no pidyon abed?
I'll tell you why. Because if it's born from a non-Jewish woman, so
Let's take a Jewish woman. I just to make these.
well, I'll tell you, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Because pidyon haben, I have to look this up, but pidyon haben is a halach in pete rechem. It has to be the first of the womb,
So
right?
it's all of their first children. None of them have.
It can't be on a practical level. It can't be because you won't be screened as you won't be a surrogate or a gestational carrier. They won't pass their medical evaluation if it's their first pregnancy. In order to be a surrogate, you have to have a pregnancy and a live birth. And by the way, many older singles have asked me to pair them with couples to be their surrogates because they haven't gotten married and they're not going to do sperm insemination and they want to be able to give life. And I have to, respectfully turn them down, not because what they're asking is unreasonable, but on a practical level, they won't be cleared as a surrogate if they've never had a pregnancy or a live birth. So it's impractical. It's impractical. But pete rechem, when it comes to pidyon haben, it's all about pete rechem. Now, if you have a sperm donor, right, and it's her first pregnancy, but he's not the father, even if it's a goyish sperm, even if it's non-Jewish sperm, there's pidyon haben.
Wow.
Because it's her first baby.
And just to circle the square, from man, wife who's a bas Kohen gets a donor egg because she has no eggs and gives birth. So would that baby have a pidyon?
No, because she's a bas Kohen.
Even though she's the genetic, she's
Right.
a carrier, she's not the genetic.
Right, because her womb.
Still the mother, it's her womb that's
I had a shaila about a year and a half ago of a woman who presented to the doctor with with real pain after getting married, painful intercourse, very abnormal sensations from the vaginal area. After a number of doctor's visits, they identified this woman as having 2 vaginas and 2 uteruses.
I have patients like that. I have a handful of patients like that.
So when you're dealing with so if a woman has 2 vaginas and 2 uteruses, it's feasible, it's plausible that a woman could have a child from one uterus, and then let's say, even if it's not medically realistic, but halachically, if she would have a second child from the other uterus, that second child would also need a pidyon haben.
Wow.
Because it's the first child from that womb. She has 2 wombs.
So there's a case report of twins with 1 baby in each womb.
Yeah.
There's a story like that in the literature. I have multiple from women who have the possibility of what you just talked about, and I've never thought about that before. Yes.
It could be that your 8th child needs a pidyon haben because the first 7 babies were from one womb, and this is the 8th baby. It's possible.
And medically, we daven that the baby goes into the same side every time because has a less of a chance of an early birth and so on.
Yeah.
So I have a patient who's pregnant right now with that, and actually the baby is in the right direction. And my last patient like that gave birth vaginally.
Wow.
So that's pretty exciting. I just wanted to finish it off with the uterine transplant. So let me just
parenthetically, just one more point. I remember there was a Dayan. This woman was Hasidish.
Yeah.
The Dayan Paskins, she was a Kala. She presented because she was experiencing pain after her wedding.
Right.
This is an amazing side. The Dayan Paskins, that knowing the information that she has 2 vaginas, so from here on in, every time she does bedikas before she goes to the mikvah, she has to check both holes. She has to make bedikas in both holes. And he actually said that he questioned whether her preparation for the chasana was even adequate because she only did bedikas in one hole.
Interesting. Very early in my career, I had a patient, she delivered. Subsequent to her delivery, the 2 vaginas has a wall down the middle. I took her to the operating room and I resected that wall, making it 1 vagina with 2 cervices.
Yeah.
Going forward.
That's what a lot of people do, yeah.
Okay. Last topic. Uterine transplant. We have.
So you do that surgery? You do that type of surgery?
I stopped, but when I started, there wasn't anybody else to do it. Now there are specialists who do all of this.
Also, but with Rokitansky syndrome, so not always, but often there's no vagina, so you need to create a hole as well, or to make it bigger.
So that's what I'm dealing with this new case that I have of working, and there are experts in the United States who enlarge the vagina so they can have intercourse. You mentioned uterine transplant. I was saving that for the last question. Today they have numerous cases, and yes.
Also, I had a question. I had a discussion once with a few Rabbanim, Rav Shechter, Rav Asher Weiss, trying to define the point where ejaculation will not be called livatala, right?
Right.
Because if you assume that livatala, because it could go into the uterus, right? There is such a shita that sperm can go into the uterus. So for a woman with Rokitansky syndrome who doesn't have a uterus, would a person actually say, could a Rav actually say that intercourse with such a woman would be considered shechva zar levatala, would be like wasting seed? We assume that a husband is allowed to have relations with his pregnant wife, even though we know for sure that's not going to yield a baby. She's pregnant.
And after menopause as well.
And after menopause, but this was a discussion between Rav Shechter and Rav Asher Weiss. They were going back and forth in this shaila. Would a woman without a uterus, would this be considered shechva zar levatala or not? You have the mitzvah of ona, right? There's a mitzvah to sexually satisfy your wife. Irrespective of sperm, no sperm, womb, no womb, there's an obligation to have relations to satisfy your wife. That's why even if you're not going to get pregnant, there's still a heter. But there was a sheet. I remember one point in the conversation, they were bothered by, or I forget exactly which one, was bothered by the fact that maybe if there's no uterus, that could present a real issue. We were discussing a specific kala who was getting engaged, and she had Rokitansky syndrome. And both of them said that she should get married and they should go ahead with the shidduch, and the husband knew what he was getting himself into. But that was this discussion. Part of the discussion was, do we have to worry about shechva zar levatala if there's no uterus? Anyway.
So a patient who has Rokitansky, born without a uterus, today could have a uterus transplanted into her from another woman. And not only have they done that, they've had successful pregnancies. So just to put a wild story, made up story. Husband sperm, wife has no uterus. And I'm going to make up an additional story. She has no eggs either. She gets a uterine transplant, has a donor egg with her husband's sperm put in, gets pregnant, and gives birth to that baby. Under my count, now I have 3 mothers involved. The one who gave birth, the uterus donor, and also the donor of the egg.
You can make it 4. I can make it 4. I can get you 4. I can match your 3. I can give you a 4th mother.
What's the 4th?
The 4th is when you take the egg
and put in.
Okay. You can have a mitochondrial donor, and you can have an egg which is made up of one woman and someone else's mitochondria put into that egg. So I could give you 4 mothers.
So they could take an egg, just to review this, take out the DNA that's in it, take somebody else's DNA, put it into that egg,
right?
Donate it to someone, put it in a uterus that was transplanted into that woman, and that woman gives birth, making this child have 1 father and 4 mothers.
Yeah, precisely.
Wow.
As a question.
Yeah.
Once we generally assume that when someone experiences a transplant, when someone undergoes a transplant, so that transplanted organ becomes part of your body.
Yes.
And there's shilohs. I mean, it's not really relevant. Who cares whose kidney it is? You know, who cares who the Baal HaKidney is?
Right.
Fact of the matter is, this person was going to die without a kidney. This person has an extra kidney. He donated it to him. Wonderful. He's alive now. Baruch Hashem. Doesn't make a difference whose kidney it is. But when we're dealing with reproductive organs, so maybe it does depend on whose kidney it is, on whose womb it is. But bottom line, there was a sefer that was written years ago called Even Yakara. And the Even Yakara writes that if you were to theoretically take an ovary, I think he was talking about ovaries, and take the ovary and implant the ovary into a different woman. At the time, it was science fiction.
Oh, reality today.
Yeah.
They implanted in the arm some of the tissue,
Mhm.
and they could grow eggs and then
Yeah.
harvest them and then use those eggs.
Exactly. So at the time, it was Purim Torah. Who would be the mother? So he writes there, the Even Yakara writes that if you actually have an organ which is implanted into someone's body, into a recipient's body, so that organ takes on the characteristics of the recipient. So we generally assume that even if you have a non-Jewish uterine donor, the recipient of the transplant now has a uterus and it becomes her uterus. That womb is now a Jewish womb, even though it originated in a non-Jewish woman. And we'll have to understand what exactly is the difference between a non-Jewish egg, which you receive, right? And we don't say that becomes part of you. Apparently, the non-Jewish egg, it doesn't become a part of you. It doesn't become attached to you. It is implanted in you. It's transferred to your body, but it's not becoming part of you, right? So that's the difference between the womb and the egg. And therefore, la halacha, we wouldn't say that there's a possibility that the womb mother or the initial womb is one of the women. We assume that it becomes part of you. But with uterine transplants, so with uterine transplants, once it becomes Jewish, I'm thinking of the Puruvu also. As long as it's Jewish, as long as the woman is Jewish herself, then it's 100% hers. It's her uterus. Yeah, it's an amazing technology. Right now, the trial is on a woman who is on her third pregnancy from the same uterus. So this woman has had 2 live births, 2 pregnancies, one after the next, and now she's on her third. So we've never had 3 babies born to one uterus, but we've had 2 babies born to one uterus, and that is done. I think it's actually finished its clinical trial. Yeah. But people should also know that these uteruses are not long-term. They usually have their children, and then they have to remove the uterus because of the autoimmune issues and the rejection. The body will eventually reject the uterus.
Again, a case where science fiction became experimental, and now there are, I don't know how many programs, but I'm sure there's more than a few programs.
The main ones are in Baylor in Texas, Cleveland Clinic. Here in Cedars-Sinai, the team is working on I don't think they've started, but they're working on on getting the team together to have a uterine transplant here in Cedars.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, just for that, we're finished talking about what we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay.
Okay. For all that are here, hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned. Please send us questions. I'll sift through them. I'll read through them, organize them, and then we'll do another Zoom call to specifically talk about questions that you've sent us. You could send them directly to me. My email, I'm going to give everybody my email. My patients all have it. J for Jonathan, D for Daniel, HERMAN @gmail.com. And then we will start disseminating. We have not decided what our next topic will, but we have a list of about 7 to 10 topics. I think eventually we're going to talk about going to the hospital in labor on Shabbos. We're going to talk about fasting on Yom Kippur. We're going to talk about induction of labor. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of different things that come up every day when I go to work. And that's the basis of the topics that we talk about. We take all ideas, we take all thoughts. Please, send it ahead. If it's not a question, just a thought or a point of view, that would be really great also.
Should we spend 5 minutes to open the floor? If anyone is here to ask a question, you have 5 minutes, Doc?
Yeah. I'm all good.
Is there anyone here who has a question for the doctor? All right.
Okay, so there were a couple of things sent by chat. Should we encourage people on this call to submit questions in the chat box? Yes, for sure. Let me just read this first before I read it out loud. I had a patient who went for a termination of pregnancy and it only worked on a baby in one side of the bicornuate uterus as per her history. I guess that meant that she was carrying twins and terminated, but they only got one and didn't go or know about the other. Okay.
Could you talk about multifetal reduction also? That reminds me of multifetal reduction.
Can you please put the email in the chat? Yes. Good. Okay, so let me good, perfect. Thank you so much. Good, and with that, I'm gonna say good night.
All right.
Okay.
Very good. Kol tov, everyone. All the best.
Good.
Thank you, Dr. Herman. Great seeing you.
You're well.